My name's Michael Reed. I'm 36 years old, and I fix air conditioners for a living. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have told you I was fine, content, steady, grateful even. But the truth is, I'd been living my whole life as a supporting character in someone else's story. You see, in my family, love was never divided evenly. It was rationed out like sugar in a Depression-era kitchen, and by the time it reached me, all that was left was dust at the bottom of the jar. When I was born, my mother looked at my brother Adam and saw the future. When she looked at me, she saw insurance. He was the plan, and I was the backup, her little helper, the steady one, the person you could call when the faucet leaked or when you needed a truck on moving day. From the time we were kids in Nashville, it was obvious who wore the crown. Adam was the miracle, the firstborn who got the applause. I was the audience that clapped along. The hook of this story? The day I realized my parents loved Adam so blindly that they tried to hand him the very life I'd built from nothing and expected me to smile while they did it. Sit back, relax, and stay with me until the very end of this story. And hey, before we go deeper, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's the best way to help me keep sharing stories that might just make you feel a little less alone. Now, about my family. My mom has this gentle southern drawl that could turn any sentence into a sermon. Adam just has such potential, she'd say to neighbors, eyes shining like she'd birthed the second coming of country music. And Michael? Oh, he's so handy to have around. I'd laugh, but inside every handy felt like a nail hammered straight through my self-worth. Dad wasn't cruel, just quiet. The kind of man who lived by routine, work, dinner, sports on TV, sleep. If I brought home an A, he nodded. If Adam brought home a C, Dad said, "It's just a phase." The favoritism wasn't loud. It was a slow, steady hum in the background of every conversation, so constant you stopped noticing the sound until one day you couldn't unhear it. Growing up, I learned early how to disappear. I fixed things that weren't mine, said yes when I wanted to say no, kept peace in rooms where I should have demanded it. I became the easy child, which in family language often means the forgotten one. Adam was praised for his ideas. I was thanked for my labor. He got dreams, I got chores. I remember once when I was 12, Adam accidentally broke Mom's favorite lamp, an antique she'd inherited from her grandmother. I took the blame because he was crying and I couldn't stand the sound of it. Mom grounded me for a week. Adam brought me a candy bar as a thank you and said, "You're the best, Mikey." Funny how a single sentence can stick in your chest for decades. I carried that pattern into adulthood without realizing it. Fixing everyone's problems, patching everyone's cracks, pretending I didn't have any of my own. If someone called, I came. If something broke, I repaired it. I told myself that being needed was the same thing as being loved. But deep down, there was always this small, stubborn voice whispering, "What about you?" That voice grew louder after Adam married Rachel. Mom practically adopted her, showering them with Sunday dinners and hand-stitched quilts, while I got the leftover invitations. Every holiday, there was a family photo of the happy couple and the kids, and somewhere off to the side, me, half smiling, holding a plate, out of frame before the flash went off. One night, after another dinner full of polite silences, I drove home through the empty streets of Nashville, my truck rattling like it was sharing my exhaustion. I remember gripping the steering wheel and thinking, if I vanished tomorrow, would anyone notice before the weekend? It wasn't self-pity, it was clarity. A moment of brutal honesty with myself. That's when I decided something had to change. I didn't know what yet, but I knew this. I was done earning love through usefulness. I wanted a life where I wasn't just the repairman for other people's mistakes. I wanted something solid, something that belonged entirely to me. But before that moment of revelation came, years of tiny humiliations that most people would miss. The birthday where everyone forgot to call because Adam's kid had a soccer game. The Christmas where Mom gave me a wrench set and gave Adam a down payment for his new SUV. The way Dad called Adam's son like it was a title and called me Buddy like I was still 12. You'd think resentment would build like pressure behind glass, ready to shatter. But mine didn't. It settled in quietly, like dust in corners no one bothers to clean. I convinced myself I was fine, that peace was better than confrontation. Still, every now and then that little voice would whisper again, "When do you get to matter, Michael?" And that right there is where this story truly begins. Not with what they did later, but with what I finally decided to do about it. Because when you've spent your whole life being the family's safety net, there comes a moment when you realize the only person who's ever caught you is yourself. That realization didn't happen overnight. It crept up in moments. An overtime shift that paid off. A tool I bought with my own money. A morning when I looked in the mirror and saw someone tired but capable. I started to believe I might deserve more than being the family's backup plan. I didn't know then that this small shift in thinking would eventually lead to a storm that would shake every lie my family ever told themselves about who I was and what I owed them. But I'll tell you this. The night I decided I was done being the helpful one was the night everything started to change. And if you think families handle change well when the golden child isn't the center anymore, just wait. Now, let me ask you something, just for fun. If you grew up in a family like mine, what would you do? A. Keep the peace, even if it meant losing yourself. B. Finally say no and start living life on your own terms. Drop your answer, A or B, in the comments below. I'd really like to know which kind of person you are. The decision came to me one sweltering July afternoon, the kind of Tennessee heat that makes the air feel like it's pressing down on your shoulders. I was standing in the attic of a stranger's house, sweat pouring off my face as I repaired an air conditioning unit that had given up on life. The couple who owned the place were away on vacation, and I remember thinking, good for them. Must be nice to afford rest. My life had been a long stretch of work with no rest in sight. Just one job blending into another, day after day, paycheck after paycheck, all to keep the lights on in a small rented apartment that didn't feel like mine. That day, something shifted. Maybe it was the heat, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was just years of quiet frustration stacking up like bricks. I looked down at my hands, calloused, cracked, stained with grease, and I realized they'd built comfort for everyone except me. I'd fixed so many other people's homes, made their spaces safe, their summers cool, their winters warm, but I didn't have a single place in this world that was truly mine. That thought hit me like a nail gun to the chest. I went home that evening, kicked off my work boots, and sat on the floor beside the single window of my small apartment. Outside, the city hummed softly, neon bleeding into the skyline. My place was nothing special. Secondhand furniture, a flickering kitchen light, the faint smell of metal and detergent that never really went away, but it was quiet. I remember grabbing a piece of scrap paper and writing one sentence, buy something that's yours. It wasn't about wealth or pride. It was about freedom. The next morning, I opened a separate savings account. I didn't tell a soul. Not my parents, not Adam, not even Carter, though he'd been my best friend since we were 10. I called it Project M. The M didn't stand for Michael. It stood for mine. I started funneling every extra dollar into it. I took every overtime shift I could. If someone's water heater broke on a Sunday, I was there. If a neighbor's unit shorted out at midnight, I drove across town. I picked up side jobs fixing fences, replacing faucets, rewiring basements. I worked until my body ached and my voice went hoarse. But every time I transferred a few $100s into that secret account, I felt lighter. I was building something invisible, one quiet dollar at a time. People around me thought I was stuck in routine. My mom would say, "You're such a hard worker, sweetheart, but when are you going to do something meaningful with your life?" I'd nod, smile, and bite my tongue. Because she didn't understand, this was meaningful. It was just silent, patient, unglamorous meaning. My late grandfather had been a carpenter. When I was a kid, I'd sit in his shed, watching him build tables and chairs from rough planks of wood. He'd run his hand across a finished piece and say, "If it's built right, it'll outlast you." He never had much, but everything he touched seemed to carry his soul in it. After he passed, I inherited his toolbox, rusted but sturdy, the kind that outlived trends. That toolbox became my companion. Every time I lifted it into my truck, it reminded me of what I was working toward, a life that would outlast the noise of other people's opinions. Saving wasn't easy. There were nights I wanted to give up, nights when the bills piled too high, when exhaustion pressed like lead against my chest. There were days when I passed by coffee shops and thought, just one nice thing, Michael. One latte won't kill you. But I'd stop myself, Remind myself of that piece of paper taped above my desk. Buy something that's yours. I learned to live lean. My meals became simple: sandwiches, eggs, a lot of peanut butter. My truck was old enough to qualify for Social Security, and the AC in it had long died. I drive with the windows down, letting the hot air slap me awake, imagining what it might feel like one day to pull into a driveway that belonged to me. About a year into my savings plan, Carter invited me to a housewarming party for his new place. Big yard, shiny porch lights, the smell of cedar, and new beginnings. Everyone congratulated him, admired his grown-up life. I smiled, shook his hand, told him I was happy for him, and I was. But when I drove home that night, a quiet ache settled in my chest. Not envy, motivation. That same week, I started researching real estate. Duplexes, fixer-uppers, foreclosure listings, anything within a price range that didn't make my stomach turn. I didn't want a dream home. I wanted something I could build up myself, something solid, something with good bones. Late nights turned into hours of scrolling through listings, running numbers, calculating, recalculating. I became fluent in interest rates and repair costs, learned how to recognize a foundation crack from a blurry online photo. Every free hour I had went into planning, into learning, into building the blueprint of the next chapter of my life. One evening, while scrolling through a local listing site, I saw it. A small, weathered duplex not far from the Cumberland River. 2 bedrooms per unit, an overgrown yard, a porch that sagged a little to the left. It wasn't beautiful, but something about it stopped me. It looked like it had a story to tell, and maybe it was ready for a new one. I drove out there the next morning before work. The grass reached my knees, the paint was peeling, and one of the windows was cracked. But when I stepped onto that porch, something clicked. The boards creaked under my boots like they were whispering, "Finally." Standing there, I could see it. Fresh paint, fixed railings, lights glowing behind clean windows. I could see myself living downstairs, renting out the top unit. I could see a future that was built by my own 2 hands, not handed down through guilt or obligation. When I told the realtor I was interested, she looked surprised. "It's got potential," she said cautiously, the polite code for, "You sure about this?" I smiled and nodded. Potential's all I need. The process that followed was long and nerve-wracking. Paperwork, inspections, mortgage meetings, all the things they never teach you in school. There were moments I thought I'd lose it, but I didn't. Every obstacle became another test of will, and by then, my will was all muscle. When the loan finally got approved, I didn't tell anyone. Not Mom, not Dad, not Adam. Especially not Adam. I didn't want advice or opinions or congratulations that came with invisible strings. I wanted quiet. I wanted ownership. Not just of a building, but of my story. The night before closing, I sat on my apartment floor with a beer in hand, staring at that same scrap of paper that started it all. It was wrinkled, faded, the ink smudged. Buy something that's yours. Tomorrow I would. I didn't know it then, but that decision would change everything. It would test every fragile thread that held my family together and force me to decide which kind of man I wanted to be. The helper who kept giving, or the builder who finally kept something for himself. And I'll be honest with you, it's a lot easier to fix someone else's broken AC than it is to rebuild your own life from the ground up. But sometimes, that's exactly what it takes. When the day finally came to sign the papers, I didn't dress up. I didn't bring anyone with me. No cheering crowd, no proud parents taking pictures for Facebook. Just me in a clean shirt, my old truck parked crooked outside the title office, and the quiet hum of Nashville traffic behind me. The woman behind the desk handed me a stack of documents, her voice rehearsed and cheerful as she walked me through the process. I nodded when appropriate, signed where she pointed, and tried not to let my hand shake. I'd been in hundreds of houses before, fixing air conditioners, replacing vents, unclogging drains. But this was the first time I was signing for one that would have my name on the deed. Not Adam's, not Mom's, not anyone else's, mine. When the last page was signed, she said, "Congratulations, Mr. Reed. You're a homeowner." The words landed like something I'd been waiting to hear my whole life, though I hadn't realized it until that very second. I walked out into the Tennessee sunlight feeling taller somehow, like the ground finally recognized me. The duplex wasn't pretty. The paint was peeling like old sunburn, and the porch had a permanent slouch. The air smelled faintly of mildew and dust, but when I stepped inside, it felt alive, like a place that had been waiting for someone to care about it again. I ran my fingers along the wall and felt the rough texture beneath the paint. It wasn't perfect, but neither was I. That felt fitting. That night, I didn't go out to celebrate. I didn't even tell Carter, though he texted me asking if I wanted to grab a beer. I just wanted to be in that space, alone, listening to the creaks, the echoes, the silence. I ordered barbecue from a little diner down the road, set the styrofoam box on the floor of what would soon be my living room, and ate with my hands, grease dripping onto the paperwork that said I owned this old, stubborn house. I looked around and whispered, "You did it, man." It wasn't pride that filled me. It was relief. Relief that for once my success wasn't up for discussion. Nobody could twist it into a comparison or measure it against Adam's achievements. Nobody could downplay it as luck or timing. It was the kind of victory that didn't need witnesses. The next few weeks were a blur of work. I fixed the plumbing first because that was muscle memory. Then the walls, patching holes, painting over years of someone else's story. The more I worked, the more I could feel my grandfather with me, that steady patience he'd taught me when I was a kid building birdhouses in his shed. Every nail, every brushstroke felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd been told wasn't worth much. I started coming early in the mornings before my regular jobs, coffee in hand, watching the sun hit the windows. In those quiet hours, before the neighborhood woke up, the house didn't just feel like a project. It felt like peace. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't even slip and mention it to Mom during her weekly check-in calls. If I told her, she'd find a way to make it hers, to remind me that Adam had been talking about buying property for years, or that maybe I should have waited for a better deal. If I told Adam, he'd laugh and ask, "Man, why'd you buy an old place like that?" If I told Carter, it would eventually leak back to my family, so I stayed silent. There's a special kind of satisfaction in keeping something to yourself when the world's so eager to take credit for your hard work. Every time I passed the front porch and saw the new coat of white paint, I thought, no one knows this but me. I spent my first night there, sleeping on an air mattress, surrounded by open paint cans and half-assembled tools. The air smelled like dust and detergent. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi, no furniture, just the hum of the fridge I'd bought secondhand. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind quiet for the first time in years. In the morning, I opened all the windows and let the sunlight flood in. It was spring by then, and the air carried that mix of fresh grass and distant rain that only happens in Tennessee right before summer. I brewed a pot of cheap coffee, sat on the porch steps, and watched the maple sapling I'd planted 2 weeks earlier. It was barely 3 feet tall, thin and fragile, swaying in the wind. But it was mine. I'd planted it with my own hands, and someday it would cast shade over this house. There was something grounding about that, the idea of building something that would outlive my need for approval. For once, I wasn't working to prove anything. I was working to build peace, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. People say the best part of success is sharing it, but I've learned there's another kind, the kind that lives quietly inside your chest, the kind you don't have to post about or defend, the kind that doesn't need applause. That's the kind I felt every time I turned the key in the lock. One evening, a neighbor stopped by. He was in his 60s, gray beard, eyes sharp but kind. "You the new owner?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He smiled, nodding. "Better you than the last one. She tried to run a cat rescue and pottery class out of this place. Never ended well." We both laughed. His name was Lou. He smelled like coffee and old books. He told me the neighborhood was quiet, good folks mostly, and then said, "You planning to rent out the top unit?" "That's the idea," I said. "Smart man," he said, tipping his cup toward me. "Build equity, make a home, both at once. Not many your age think like that." After he left, I stood there watching the porch light flicker. His words lingered. Build equity, make a home. I realized then that what I was doing wasn't just fixing up a property, it was rebuilding myself from the inside out. A few days later, I found myself walking through the empty top unit, thinking about the kind of people I'd want living there. I wanted tenants who respected the place, who'd see its charm instead of its flaws, people who'd understand the feeling of starting over. As I looked around, I thought about how, for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. Not my parents, not Adam's. I wasn't hoping for acknowledgement or validation. I was just living. I'd built something tangible, something my sweat, my patience, and my stubbornness had created. When I finally finished cleaning that day, I sat in the middle of the floor, leaned back against the wall, and looked around. The room smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I remember whispering again, "You did it." No cameras, no witnesses, no congratulations, just quiet. And you know what? It was the best sound I'd ever heard. That duplex didn't just represent ownership, it represented escape. It meant I'd built something in a world that had taught me to always play small. I didn't care if no one else ever saw it. The victory was real, even if it was invisible. I locked up, stepped outside into the cool night air, and looked at the maple tree by the fence. The wind caught its thin branches and made them dance. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to clap for me. The only applause I needed was the sound of the leaves rustling in my own yard. It started with a text from my mother that felt too cheerful to be real. "Family dinner this Sunday. Everyone's coming. It'll be so nice to catch up." There were 2 red heart emojis at the end, which was my first clue something was off. My mother only used emojis when she was buttering people up or covering something up. I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard, considering excuses. I could say I had a late job or that I wasn't feeling well. But something in me, a mix of suspicion and curiosity, made me type back, "Sure, I'll be there." Sunday came heavy and humid, the kind of Tennessee summer evening that makes the air thick enough to chew. I pulled up to my parents' house. Same white shutters, same perfectly trimmed hedges, same driveway that used to feel like home, but now just made my stomach twist. As I stepped out of my truck, I could already hear laughter from inside. Adam's laugh. Loud, effortless, confident. The laugh of someone who's never had to wonder if they belonged. Mom opened the door before I could knock, arms wide, perfume strong enough to choke the first impression out of me. "Michael," she said, pulling me into a hug that was just a little too tight, a little too rehearsed. "We've missed you." "Missed me?" I said, half smiling. "It's been what, 3 weeks?" She laughed, waving me inside. "Well, that's 3 weeks too long." The dining table was already full. My father was in his usual seat at the head, Adam beside him, and Rachel, my sister-in-law, was setting out the last of the silverware. She turned when she saw me, her lipstick too bright for a casual Sunday. "Michael," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, even though I almost had. Dinner started the same way it always did, small talk disguised as civility. My mom asked about work, and I told her things were steady. Dad nodded, uninterested but polite. Adam jumped in before I could finish. "You're still doing HVAC, right? Man, I don't know how you do it in this heat." "It's honest work," I said. "Sure, sure," Adam replied, smirking. "Hey, someone's got to keep the AC running for the rest of us." Rachel laughed softly, the way people do when they're trying not to seem rude but enjoying it anyway. Mom reached over, touching my hand in what looked like affection, but felt like stage direction. "We're all so proud of you, sweetheart," she said. "You've always been so hardworking." That word again, hardworking. The family's favorite backhanded compliment. It meant dependable, not successful. Useful, not impressive. I chewed my roast chicken slowly, wondering what exactly this dinner was about, because I knew it wasn't about me. It never was. As the meal went on, Adam told stories about his new job in sales, about how his kids were starting soccer, about how Rachel was volunteering at their church. Every story came with an applause break from Mom, a "that's my boy" from Dad, and the occasional humble smile from Rachel. When Adam spoke, the room glowed. When I spoke, it dimmed again. I'd gotten used to that dynamic. But that night, there was something different in the air, a careful orchestration, a buildup, like a play reaching its climax. I could feel it coming before anyone said a word. Finally, Mom leaned back in her chair, smiling that too sweet smile that usually meant manipulation was on the menu. So she began, "What's new with you, Michael? Any big plans lately?" I shrugged. "Same old. Work's good." She tilted her head, disappointed. "That's it?" "Yep." Her smile flickered just for a second. Then she looked toward Adam and Rachel. "Well," she said brightly, "it's funny you mention work, Because your brother and Rachel have had quite a week. Adam set his fork down, sighed dramatically, and said, "Yeah, we're kind of in between places right now. Our lease ended, and the new house isn't ready yet." Mom nodded sympathetically. "It's been so stressful for them. You know how it is." I nodded slowly. "I can imagine." Dad cleared his throat, his signal that something big was coming. "Your mother and I were thinking," he said carefully, "since you've got that property now." I froze. The words hit like ice water. "What property?" I asked, though I already knew. Mom's eyes sparkled. "Oh, come on, sweetheart. Carter told us. You bought a place near the river, right? A duplex?" I felt my jaw tighten. Of course Carter had told them. He'd always been terrible at keeping secrets. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I did." Mom beamed, but it wasn't pride. It was opportunity. "That's wonderful. We're so happy for you." And it actually gave us an idea. Here it was, the setup. She clasped her hands like she was about to announce a charity drive. "Since you have 2 units, and Adam and Rachel need a place just for a few weeks, maybe they could stay with you." "It's perfect." Rachel nodded quickly. "Just until the new house is ready," she said. "A month at most." I looked from her to Adam, to my parents, all of them smiling as if this was already decided. My mother even added, "You've got space, right? It's not like you're using both units." For a long moment, no one said a word. The air felt thick, electric. I set my fork down carefully and said, "You all just decided this?" Mom gave a little laugh. "It's just family helping family. You've always been independent, Michael. You can handle it." There it was. The guilt wrapped in flattery. The same trick they'd used my whole life. I wanted to shout, to tell them how hard I'd worked, how I'd bled and sweated and saved for years for that duplex. I wanted to say that it was the first thing I'd ever done without their shadow hanging over me. But I knew how that would go. Mom would cry. Dad would get quiet. Adam would say something like, "Geez, it was just a suggestion, man," and somehow I'd end up apologizing. So I smiled instead. "Actually," I said evenly, "both units are already rented." It wasn't true, but it would be soon. I could feel my pulse in my throat as I lied. Mom blinked. "Oh, really? That's sudden." "Yeah," I said, "just signed the leases last week." The silence that followed was almost satisfying. For once, I had surprised them. Dad cleared his throat again, looking at Adam, then back at me. "Well, that's good. Sounds like you're doing well for yourself." There was something brittle in his tone, like pride mixed with disbelief. Mom finally smiled, but the sweetness was gone. "That's wonderful, honey," she said. "I just wish you told us. We like to be part of your life." I met her gaze, steady and calm. "You are," I said, "just not every decision." Her expression flickered. Confusion, irritation, then the careful mask of maternal warmth sliding back into place. She stood, gathering dishes with forced cheerfulness. "Well," she said, "who wants pie?" No one answered. That night, driving home, I replayed every word in my head. The way Adam looked at me like I'd failed some unspoken test. The way Mom's smile turned sharp when she realized she couldn't rearrange my life like furniture. I should have felt guilty, maybe even defensive. But all I felt was calm. Because for the first time, I told them no. And deep down, I knew that one small word would change everything. The thing about families like mine is they never confront you head on. They don't shout, they don't argue, they don't even ask. They suggest. They plant little seeds of guilt that sprout overnight, winding themselves around your conscience until you can't tell if you're being kind or being controlled. After that dinner, the silence lasted only a day before the messages began. Mom texted first. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. You've done so well for yourself. Family always helps family, right?" The words looked harmless enough, but I could feel the weight behind them, the kind of politeness that leaves bruises. I didn't respond. I told myself I was busy, but really, I was giving myself permission not to explain. An hour later, Adam chimed in. "Hey man, Mom said you've got both units rented. That's great. I didn't realize you were doing that well. Guess we'll figure something else out for now." The "for now" hung there like bait. I stared at the message for a long time, fingers hovering over the keyboard before typing one word. "Thanks." Then I muted the group chat. It didn't end there. Families like mine don't take boundaries as answers. They take them as invitations to try harder. By midweek, Mom was dropping by my work site, bringing homemade biscuits in a tin. She never visited me on the job before. She leaned against my truck, smiling too wide. Your brothers had such a rough time, she began, the way someone might start talking about the weather before a storm. The kids are out of sorts, you know how it is. I do, I said carefully, setting down my wrench. You've always had such a generous heart, Michael. You're not the kind to turn family away. She said it like a compliment, but it was a command. I wiped my hands on a rag and smiled. I'm sure they'll figure it out. Adam's good at that. For a moment, her expression cracked. I saw surprise, maybe even hurt. Then she regrouped, nodded tightly, and left the biscuits on my tailgate. I didn't touch them. That night, I saw the same white SUV drive past my duplex for the first time. Slow, deliberate, like a shark circling shallow water. I watched from the window as it paused by the curb, headlights reflecting off the for rent signs I'd just taken down. A few seconds later, it rolled away. The next morning, my neighbor Lou called over the fence. Your folks were out here last night, he said, sipping his coffee like it was neighborhood gossip. They drove by twice. I tried to laugh. Guess they miss me. Maybe, Lou said, narrowing his eyes. Or maybe they're just not used to you having something they don't control. He wasn't wrong. Over the next week, the guilt campaign went into full swing. Texts came like clockwork. We just want what's best for everyone. It's such a shame there's all that space going unused. You've always been the dependable one, Michael. I'd read them in silence, feeling that old reflex rise up, the one that made me want to fix things, to smooth things over, to give in just to make the noise stop. That's what families like mine count on, your exhaustion. But something had changed in me since buying the duplex. I'd spent years building walls and foundations, learning what holds and what collapses. I realized that boundaries are like houses. You build them not to keep people out, but to protect what's inside. Still, it hurt. There's no manual for refusing your parents. Every no felt like a small betrayal. I'd catch myself imagining Adam's kids, their faces when he told them they'd be staying in some extended stay motel. Then I'd think about all the years I'd said yes to things that broke me a little more each time, and I knew that guilt wasn't the same thing as goodness. The next Sunday, I was out repainting the fence when Mrs. Lacey from across the street called out, "Your mama's SUV slowed down again. Third time this week. She pretending she lost her way or something?" I grinned despite myself. Maybe she just likes the neighborhood. Mrs. Lacey laughed. Honey, she's patrolling it. That night, the group chat lit up again. Mom, your brother found a temporary place, but it's so expensive. I just don't understand why you won't help. Dad, back in my day, families stuck together. No questions asked. Rachel didn't say anything, but Adam followed with, It's disappointing, man. We thought you were better than this. Better than what? Better than finally having a spine? I didn't answer. I took a long shower, let the water drown out my thoughts, then sat on the porch with a cold beer, staring at the maple tree swaying in the dark. I realized they weren't angry because they needed help. They were angry because I'd stopped being predictable. I'd stopped being the family's safety net. The next morning, I saw them again. The SUV, parked across the street. Mom in the passenger seat, Dad behind the wheel, both pretending they weren't watching. I was on my knees fixing a loose board when my new tenant, Karen, walked out with a plate of muffins. For you, she said. They're blueberry. My husband used to love them. Thanks, I said, standing up. Your parents? She asked, nodding toward the car. Yeah, she smiled kindly. You know, sometimes people don't like when you stop living the version of your life they approved of. Her words landed heavier than she knew. That afternoon, I decided to stop hiding. I posted a photo of the duplex, fresh paint, the new porch light glowing, and wrote, a year of hard work, no shortcuts, no handouts. 2 units, 1 dream come true. I wasn't trying to provoke anyone, but within an hour, the family chat exploded. Mom, that's a bit passive-aggressive, don't you think? Adam, real mature, man. We just wanted to be part of your life. Guess that's too much to ask. I almost typed something back. I almost defended myself, almost apologized just to make the noise stop. But then I thought of the nights I'd eaten peanut butter sandwiches to save a few extra dollars, the blisters on my hands from sanding floors, the sound of my own voice whispering. You did it, man. I put the phone down. The silence that followed was strange, like standing in a room after a storm and realizing the walls held. It was quiet, but it wasn't lonely. A few days later, Lou saw me outside and said, They'll come around or they won't. Either way, you keep living. And that's exactly what I did. I focused on work, on keeping the duplex running smoothly, on small things that made my days feel lighter. Morning coffee on the porch, the hum of the city at night. Every time my phone buzzed, I took a breath before checking it. Some messages I read. Most I ignored. By the end of that month, my family's guilt had turned into something else. Silence mixed with disbelief. They couldn't understand how I could just not respond. But that's the thing about boundaries. Once you learn to hold them, they start to hold you back in return. One evening, I caught my reflection in the window while the sun went down behind the maple tree. I looked older, maybe, but steadier. The man staring back wasn't the family's fixer anymore. He was just a man who'd learned that kindness without boundaries is just surrender dressed up to look noble. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Peace doesn't always arrive with fireworks or celebration. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a soft rain that falls after a long drought. And you don't even realize how much you needed it until everything starts to bloom again. That's what those months felt like for me. Ordinary days that somehow carried a sense of calm I'd never known before. Once the dust settled from all the family drama, I focused on the simple rhythm of the duplex. The tenants moved in not long after. Two people who, without knowing it, helped me rediscover a sense of belonging that my own family had never given me. The first was Karen, a retired nurse in her early 60s who rented the upstairs unit. She had this gentle warmth about her, the kind that made strangers feel like old friends. When she first came to see the apartment, she wore a floppy sun hat and carried a tote bag filled with freshly baked bread. "I always bring something when I visit new places," she'd said with a smile. "It's good luck." I liked her immediately. She didn't ask for a discount, didn't question the neighborhood, didn't flinch at the peeling paint on the stairwell. She just looked around and said, "It feels lived in." That's a good sign. A few days later came Eli, the tenant for the downstairs unit. A single father in his 40s, he taught math at the local high school. His handshake was firm but kind, and his eyes carried a quiet fatigue that I recognized instantly. The look of someone who's had to rebuild from scratch. When he told me he liked fixing things, I joked, "Then you're going to fit right in." It didn't take long for both of them to settle into their lives, and with them around, the duplex started to feel less like a project and more like a small community. Karen spent her mornings tending to the flower pots she'd lined along her balcony. Eli spent his evenings in the backyard, strumming an old guitar after his son went to sleep. The sound drifted through the open windows, filling the air with something that felt like peace. Every weekend, I'd work on small improvements, repainting the porch, fixing squeaky doors, tightening leaky faucets. It wasn't just about maintenance anymore. It was about pride. Sometimes, when I was working outside, Karen would bring down lemonade or muffins, saying, "No one can build on an empty stomach." Other times, Eli would lend a hand, joking that it was good math therapy to measure and cut boards. It's funny how strangers can make a place feel more like home than family ever could. With them, there were no expectations, no guilt trips, no silent comparisons. We helped each other because we wanted to, not because we owed anything. One Saturday afternoon, the three of us ended up sitting on the porch together for the first time. The air was heavy with the smell of fresh-cut grass, and the sky was the color of faded denim. Karen had made iced tea, Eli brought chips, and I fired up my old grill for some burgers. It was supposed to be a quick lunch, but it turned into hours of talking and laughing about everything and nothing. Karen told stories from her nursing days, how she once delivered a baby in a parking lot during a storm, how she still wrote letters to some of her old patients. Eli shared how teaching had saved him after his divorce, how numbers made sense when emotions didn't. When it was my turn, I found myself telling them about my family, about Adam, about the duplex, and what it really meant to me. I hadn't planned on sharing that part, but something about that easy afternoon made it feel safe. When I finished, there was a quiet moment. Then Karen nodded and said softly, "You did good, Michael. You broke the pattern." Eli raised his glass, to building something that's finally yours. It was a small gesture, but it hit me hard. I realized that for the first time, I wasn't the spare part in someone else's story. I was the main character in my own. As the weeks passed, the three of us developed an unspoken rhythm. Karen's balcony flowers began to bloom brighter than any I'd seen before, splashes of color that made the old building look almost proud of itself. Eli mowed the lawn without being asked, sometimes whistling a tune that drifted through my window while I worked at my desk. They both paid rent on time. No drama, no excuses. There was a certain beauty in the ordinariness of it all. The sound of Karen's laughter when I helped her carry groceries, the smell of Eli's cooking drifting up the stairs, the creak of the porch swing late at night when I sat there alone, listening to the hum of the neighborhood. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't realized I'd been missing: peace without conditions. One evening, after a long day fixing a client's AC unit, I came home to find a plate of blueberry muffins waiting on my porch. A note sat on top in Karen's neat handwriting: "For the man who builds homes and hearts at the same time." I laughed out loud, but when I sat down and took the first bite, I felt my throat tighten. No one in my family had ever said anything like that to me. They had praised my work ethic, sure, but never my heart. A few days later, Eli knocked on my door holding a toolbox. "I noticed the fence gates sticking again," he said. "Mind if I take a crack at it?" We ended up fixing it together as the sun set. Two men who didn't say much but understood plenty without words. When we finished, he leaned against the fence, wiping his hands, and said, "You know, my dad and I used to do this kind of thing, except we always ended up arguing." I smiled. "I know the feeling." He looked at me, then nodded. "Yeah, I figured you might." We didn't talk about it after that. We didn't need to. In the months that followed, I found myself smiling more. The duplex no longer felt like a wall separating me from the world. It felt like a bridge. Every small moment, the sound of Karen humming through her open window, the sight of Eli's son riding his bike in the driveway, stitched me closer to something resembling family. Not the kind I'd been born into, but the kind that's chosen through kindness and quiet understanding. One night, sitting on the porch, under the glow of the porch light, I realized something important. My parents had always seen independence as distance, but it wasn't. It was space to breathe, to build, to let new people in without losing yourself. I wasn't lonely anymore. I was full in a way that didn't depend on approval. The next morning, I woke up early, brewed some coffee, and watched the sunrise spill across the yard. The maple tree I'd planted months earlier had grown taller, its leaves brushing against the edge of the roof. I thought about how much it had changed since I first put it in the ground, how roots take time to settle, how growth is quiet until suddenly it's undeniable. That tree, that duplex, those two people, they were all proof that I hadn't just built a home. I'd built a life that finally felt like mine. And in that calm, ordinary morning, for the first time, I understood that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as simple as staying gentle in a world that tried to make you hard. Some endings don't explode. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary moments, until you realize everything has changed. That's how the final confrontation with my family began. It wasn't a fight. It was a Sunday afternoon barbecue in my backyard, the smell of grilled chicken and laughter floating through the air, and for once, I wasn't thinking about them at all. Karen had made her famous potato salad, and Eli was showing me how to properly use the smoker I'd bought secondhand. The maple tree cast just enough shade across the yard, and there was music playing, an old country tune that hummed like nostalgia without pain. It was the kind of simple happiness I'd spent years unknowingly chasing. Then Karen tilted her head toward the street. "You expecting company?" I followed her gaze, and there it was, the white SUV, my parents' car. The sight of it made my stomach tighten before my mind could catch up. The vehicle slowed to a stop across the street, and the engine went quiet. Eli muttered under his breath, "Guess the peace treaty's over." The doors opened in unison. My mom stepped out first, clutching her purse like armor, her smile painted on but trembling at the edges. Dad got out next, slow and deliberate, the way he always did when he was bracing for something. And behind them, Adam, my brother, stood by the curb with his hands shoved in his pockets, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, none of them moved. They just stood there watching me, holding tongues in one hand and a beer in the other, surrounded by the smell of food, the sound of laughter, and people who genuinely liked me for who I was. I could have walked over. I could have invited them in. That's what the old Michael would have done. The fixer, the pleaser, the good son. But that man didn't live here anymore. Instead, I set down the tongues, took a slow sip of beer, and looked back at them. Karen whispered, "You want us to go inside?" I shook my head. "No, let's stay." We kept talking, pretending we didn't see the SUV, though the air felt charged, heavy with everything unsaid. My parents lingered longer than was reasonable, and eventually Mom crossed the street. "Michael?" she called, voice sweet but tight. I met her halfway down the driveway. Up close, I could see the strain in her eyes, the desperate kindness that only shows up when manipulation isn't working. "We were just in the neighborhood," she said. "Sure you were." She sighed. "Do we have to do this?" "Do what?" I asked. "This distance, the silence, you ignoring us like we're strangers." I crossed my arms. "I'm not ignoring anyone. I just stopped volunteering for guilt trips." Her smile faltered. "We're family, Michael. I know. Then act like it." That line hit harder than she realized. For a moment, I thought about the decades of acting like family. That meant saying yes when I wanted to say no, fixing what wasn't mine to fix, swallowing my pride because keeping the peace mattered more than being at peace. I took a breath. "I am acting like family," I said quietly. "Just not the kind you're used to." Behind her, Adam shifted uncomfortably. He looked different, tired, worn. His shirt was wrinkled, his face drawn. "Mom," he said softly, "maybe we should just go." She turned to him, startled. "We're talking." "No," I said. "You're talking at me." There was a silence that seemed to stretch across the whole yard. Eli and Karen had gone quiet, but I could feel their presence, solid, steady like anchors. Then Dad spoke up for the first time. "Your mother just wants everyone to get along. That's not such a crime, is it?" "No," I said. "But forcing people to choose between peace and self-respect is." Mom blinked, like she couldn't decide whether to cry or shout. "We just wanted to feel close again," she said. "Mom," I said softly, "you don't get close by invading someone's life. You get close by respecting the space they built." For the first time, she didn't have an answer. She turned toward the house, maybe to look for something, some crack in my expression, some sign that she could still persuade me. But there wasn't one. The quiet resolve I felt wasn't cold or cruel. It was peace. I didn't hate her, or Dad, or even Adam. I just didn't owe them the old version of me anymore. Eventually, she nodded, tight-lipped, and went back to the car. Dad followed, but Adam lingered. He didn't speak at first. He just stared at the house, at the porch, at the maple tree. "You really did it," he said finally. "You actually built something." "Yeah," I said. "I did." He looked down at his shoes, kicking a loose pebble across the driveway. "You know, Mom thinks you're being selfish, but honestly, I think she's just scared." "Scared of what?" "That you don't need her anymore." The words surprised me, not because they weren't true, but because they came from him. For the first time in years, he wasn't speaking like the golden child, the family's pride. He was just my brother. "You could have told her no, too," I said quietly. He gave a dry laugh. "Yeah, well, some habits die harder than others." We stood there for a while, the space between us, filled with a lifetime of things we'd both left unsaid. Then he looked up, eyes glossy with exhaustion. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it." I wanted to believe him. Maybe part of me did, but apologies don't rebuild trust, they just acknowledge where the cracks started. "Thanks," I said, "but I think we're both figuring things out in our own way." He nodded. "Guess so." When he turned back toward the SUV, I called after him. "Adam." He stopped. "So, next time you want to visit," I said, "you don't have to bring an audience." He smiled a little. "Fair enough." Then he got in the car and they drove off. I watched them disappear down the street, the sound of the engine fading until there was only the soft hum of the grill behind me. When I turned back, Karen was cleaning up plates and Eli was packing away the cooler. "You okay?" Karen asked gently. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, yeah, I think I am." That night, after everyone left, I sat on the porch with a beer and the quiet hum of crickets around me. The moonlight spilled across the yard, catching the edges of the maple leaves, making them shimmer silver. I thought about everything that had led to that moment. The years of playing small, of waiting for permission to breathe, of trying to earn a love that came with conditions. And now, here I was, free. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't look like rebellion or victory. Sometimes it's just a man sitting on his porch at midnight, realizing he doesn't owe anyone an explanation for his peace. I leaned back, feeling the rough wood beneath my palms, and exhaled. The house was quiet, steady, mine. That was the final line in the sand. Not an argument, not a door slammed shut, just a choice to stop shrinking, to live the life I'd built without apology. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the spare son. I felt whole. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It came slowly, quietly, like the way morning light slips under a door, soft, patient, unstoppable. After that afternoon when my parents and Adam drove away, I thought there'd be a storm. Angry calls, long messages, maybe another family intervention disguised as concern. But there was nothing. Just silence. A silence that felt both foreign and familiar. Like walking into a house after years of noise and realizing you can finally hear your own breath. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. For most of my life, my family's disapproval had been the background hum of my existence. Constant, low, unavoidable. Without it, the world felt too still. I kept expecting my phone to buzz, waiting for mom's texts that always began with sweetheart and ended with guilt. When none came, I started sleeping better, waking up lighter. A week passed. Then two. The duplex took on a new kind of rhythm, one defined by small joys, not emotional chaos. Karen's laughter drifted down from her balcony in the mornings as she watered her flowers, singing along to old soul records. Eli and his son started hosting backyard movie nights with a bedsheet strung up against the fence. I'd bring popcorn, they'd bring stories, and for a few hours under the stars, we'd just exist together. No expectations, no roles to play, no one trying to outshine anyone else. It felt like family. Not the kind I'd grown up with, the kind that demanded silence to keep the peace, but the kind built on mutual respect, on quiet gratitude. One Thursday afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. I knew it was from my mother the moment I saw the handwriting. Her cursive was elegant but tight, the Y in Michael curled so hard it looked strangled. My stomach knotted as I opened it. The paper smelled faintly of her perfume, lavender and something heavier, maybe regret. "Dear Michael," it began, "we're disappointed in how things turned out. Family means sacrifice. You had a chance to help your brother, and instead, you chose pride. I hope one day you'll realize what you've lost." There was no signature at the end, just her initials, MR, as if she couldn't bring herself to write Mom. I read it 3 times. Each time, it hurt a little less. By the 4th, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Because for the first time, her words didn't define me. They didn't ignite guilt or anger. They just ended. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer beside old receipts and worn-out keys. Then I grabbed my truck keys and drove to a print shop downtown. The idea came to me as I stood in line, half out of defiance, half out of closure. I printed a photo I'd taken the week before. The duplex at sunset, the porch glowing gold, the maple trees swaying just enough to look alive. Across the bottom of the image, I had them print 3 simple words in bold black letters, "Built without permission." The next day, I mailed it to my parents' house with no note, no return address. Just the picture. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was the truth, and maybe the most honest thing I'd ever sent them. A week later, Adam unfollowed me on social media. Rachel blocked me altogether. And my mother, true to form, sent one final text in the family group chat. "You've made your choice. I hope you're proud of yourself." I didn't respond, but I pinned the message at the top of the chat. Every time I opened it, those words stared back at me. "You've made your choice." Yes, I had. And for the first time in my life, I was proud of it. Months went by. The seasons shifted. The leaves on the maple tree deepened from green to amber to red. The duplex grew stronger, more alive. I fixed the gutters before the fall rains came, repainted the back fence, and added new lights along the walkway. Small improvements, maybe, but each one felt symbolic. Every nail, every brushstroke was a quiet declaration. I am here. I am whole. Karen started hosting Sunday dinners. Nothing fancy, just homemade pasta, laughter, and too much dessert. She'd invite me and Eli, sometimes a few neighbors. One evening, she made a toast. "To found family," she said, raising her glass. "To the people we didn't plan on, but ended up needing the most." Eli smiled at me over the rim of his glass. "To the landlord who actually shows up for the good stuff." We all laughed, and I realized something then. Family isn't just who shares your blood, it's who shares your peace. The following spring marked a full year since the day I signed the papers. On the anniversary, I took the day off work and decided to celebrate quietly. No party, no announcements. Just a small cookout in the backyard. The maple tree had grown tall enough to throw shade over half the yard now. Karen baked lemon bars. Eli grilled burgers. His son ran through the sprinkler barefoot, laughing like summer itself. At one point, I went inside and pulled an envelope from the drawer, the first rent check I'd ever received. I framed it and hung it on the hallway wall, right next to a new photo. The three of us standing in front of the duplex, smiling like people who'd found something worth keeping. When I stepped back outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the yard in soft orange light. Karen handed me a beer. "You look content," she said. "I am," I replied. For the first time, the words weren't a performance. They were the truth. As the night settled, I sat on the porch, watching fireflies flicker in the dark, listening to the hum of conversation from the yard. Somewhere between the laughter and the music, I thought about my parents, not with anger or sadness, but with a strange kind of calm. I realized I didn't need an apology to move on. Forgiveness didn't mean inviting them back into my life. It just meant I no longer carried their disappointment like a weight. I didn't need to prove them wrong anymore. I'd already proven something to myself. When everyone went home that night, I stayed outside for a while longer, my beer warm in my hand, the house behind me glowing with soft yellow light. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who said yes to everything, who confused obedience with love, who mistook guilt for virtue. And I thought about the man I'd become, the one who built walls, not to keep people out, but to build a home inside them. The quiet was deep, almost holy. I could hear the rustle of the maple leaves, the faint creak of the porch boards, the steady hum of my own heart. I picked up my phone, opened the family group chat, and looked at the pinned message one last time. "You've made your choice. I hope you're proud of yourself." I smiled, whispered to no one. "I am." Then I set the phone down, leaned back in my chair, and let the night carry the rest. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't demand to be noticed. It just fills the space you once left open for pain, and if you're lucky, it stays. When you look at Michael Reed's story from beginning to end, it isn't really about a duplex or property or even the years of family tension. It's about ownership in the truest sense. For so long, Michael lived in the shadows of his brother Adam, the golden son, and a family that measured love through control. He worked, endured, and accepted his role as the reliable one, until one day he quietly decided to build something that belonged only to him. That decision, to buy an old, broken-down duplex and rebuild it with his own two hands, became more than a financial victory. It was a declaration of self-worth. Through sleepless nights, emotional distance, and guilt-laced manipulation, Michael stood his ground. He learned that saying no doesn't make you unkind, and choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. In the end, what he created wasn't just a home. It was a sanctuary, proof that peace can grow where approval once lived. The lesson in Michael's story is one most of us need to relearn. You are allowed to set boundaries without apologizing. Family love is precious, but it should never cost your peace or your sense of self. The people who truly care about you will adjust. The ones who don't will fall away, and that's okay. Apply this lesson by asking yourself, before every yes, whether you're doing it out of love or out of fear. Build your boundaries like Michael built his duplex, slowly, steadily, and without permission. Now let me ask you, if you were in Michael's position, what would you have done? A. Let your family move in to keep the peace. B. Protect your space, even if it means upsetting them. Comment your answer, A or B, below. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between peace and pleasing others? Share your story in the comments so others can learn from it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive and gives me the strength to bring you more real, heartfelt tales like this one.